This world. I am Syed Shabahat Ali, and you're watching Fault Lines. Sudan is in a state of military conflict that apparently seems to be a conflict not ending through any other means. All the efforts to negotiate to bring both the sides on the table so far have failed, despite the fact that countries like Saudi Arabia have been persistently pushing the two sides to get onto the table. The conflict that ignited on 15th of April has so far caused a humanitarian crisis for millions of people. Importantly, RSF, that is a paramilitary force of Sudan, is attacked with massive numbers of personnel, of military personnel on the capital Khartoum, where Khartoum is being defended by the military, which are lesser in numbers with the use of air force, and that is what is causing more of a humanitarian problem because air force is being used in the settlement of highly urbanized, populated pockets of the city. A country of 45 million people is facing this catastrophic crisis. A country that is located in the Sahel region and has an ideal atmosphere to slip into a perpetual state of chaos and crisis because the developments in the neighboring countries are quite conducive for it. For this program, we have invited a guest who not only belongs to Sudan, not only is an expert of IR, but also he's one of the people who are affected by this conflict, who has escaped from Khartoum and has taken refuge in the city of Riyadh. He's joining me from Saudi Arabia, Riyadh. His name is Yaser Zeidan. He's PhD candidate of George Washington University of USA and was working as a lecturer in National University of Sudan at Khartoum. He teaches international relations. I welcome you, Yaser Zeidan, to my show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yaser, you left Sudan and took refuge. You had to travel alongside your family. You must have seen other people also suffering heavily from this crisis. Tell us your side of the story. What have you observed and seen while this crisis unfolded on your city?
Yes, it was a very terrifying experience, of course. The morning of that Saturday, April 15th, we just woke up to the sound of gunfires and airstrikes. After a couple of days, we realized that I have to leave the house with my wife because we already got some of the bullets and weaponry inside our house. So we just left our house to my uncle's, and then days later I had to take a bus from Khartoum to Port Sudan, where is the main port, and from there we took a US Navy ship to the port of Jeddah. So we just evacuated the whole country.
And many other people would not be as lucky as you were, could not escape from there. So tell us about the people who are still stuck in the eye of a storm.
So many people has moved from Khartoum to another cities that is not experiencing the same, not experiencing the conflict. People went to northern Sudan or southern city of Medani, or even inside Khartoum, where is it safer to actually live. But they left the city center, all the neighborhoods that is close to the airport. All of these areas has been like just cleared from any civilian life.
Yasser, taking advantage of your presence in this program, I would want to understand the pattern of this conflict. I mean, is it a fact that different militias are fighting against the army in different pockets in the country? Or all of this fight is happening actually in the capital? What is the pattern of this conflict at the moment?
So there is airstrikes, but the most kind of like scaring or like the terrifying things is that the RSF troops are kind of like they were hitting their camps, so they spread into the civilian neighborhoods where they kind of like terrify the people. They instruct like checkpoints to search people, and also at many occasions they broken into people's houses and just getting some stealing like gold or like even belongings, food. So that's the most scariest thing, is that you, even if you're in your house, you could be stormed by the RSF soldiers. So I think that's a big thing. But the fight itself the the like airstrikes, the street fights are in this like the head military headquarters and the presidential palace, which is kind of relatively far from the neighborhood, far from civilian compounds. But because the camps, the RSF camps, were kind of like in the middle of those in civilian neighborhood, so they spread into those, and that produced a security hazard to people, like even if they are sheltering in their houses.
So, from what you have just said, I can assume that it is RSF that does not have the support of the people, and the sympathy of the people rests with the military that is trying to defend the city. Correct me if I am mistaken.
Yeah, exactly, the RSF. Because so the RSF has a history of being like a militia that is led by a group, like a family members, and they had a very bad history in Darfur, like the Darfur genocide, because they kind of like developed out of the Janjaweed militia, which has a very, very bad history. Everyone knows about it. So when it comes to Khartoum and the people in Khartoum, the RSF has been, growing as a paramilitary, this like even out of the state institutions. They have their own financial institution, banking, gold mines, everything. And for the people, like just regular people, it's just they 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 were calling actually when the protests happening back in 2019 and this revolution and then the uprising, people were demanding that the RSF should be integrated into the military, the Sudanese military service. However, that kind of was postponed. At the time, there was some political interest that kept the RSF going. But now everyone sees it like this should have never happened if the RSF was integrated earlier. So yeah, I think the general sentiment is against the RSF because of the historical atrocities, but also because of this current situation they put the country in.
Zidane, many analysts in the West are claiming this to be an ethical conflict as well. And what they argue is that it's an Arab Africans versus non Arab Africans saga that has unfolded in Sudan. Would you agree with this statement?
I totally disagree, and I think it's a very irresponsible way to portray the conflict, because you have both Arabs and non-Arabs in the Sudanese army, and you have both Arabs and non-Arabs in the RSF. But the best way is to actually uh, to present this conflict, or like to talk about it, is that this is a paramilitary, a militia that is fighting to seize power in a country, and the Sudanese armed forces is the maybe the remaining of the state institution that is fighting for the existence of the state. I think that's how the Western media should put it, and that's how should understand it. Because if the RSF control the state, it's gonna be like a militia-owned state, and probably is gonna disintegrate into a failed state.
So, which part of the country are under the control of RSF?
At the moment, the RSF actually deployed all its troops to the capital, to Khartoum. So all other parts of the country are basically controlled by the military, except Khartoum itself. And inside Khartoum, there is like some kind of strongholds of the RSF, which they had their camps and they had their like headquarters. So they have many troops. The problem is that before the conflict, before, like some weeks before the conflict started, the RSF, the leader Hemeti, he actually deployed all of his troops to the capital. The military, actually, the military kind of like personnel or like troops were spread out all over the country. So that's why until now you can see that the RSF has kind of a temporarily advantage over the military, because their troops are much bigger than the regular armed forces. But now the regular armed forces have also called troops from other regions, and they're coming to the capital for to actually liberate it from the RSF.
Zidan, many people say that RSF is also getting some help from the other countries, and also they say that military is also trying to get help from the international actors in this war. Is it a fact that international actors, nation states, as well as some independent groups, are also active in this conflict in Sudan?
I think this is also a problem of mirror imaging by the Western media. Is trying to kind of like formulate the conflict as like basically driven by international players, and it has some international connection, but it's actually it's a political crisis that was going in Sudan since 2020, because you have political turmoil, you have political parties siding with either kind of side of the armed forces, and that in terms have also kind of did not improve the situation politically. In terms of the SAF, so everyone knows that our RSF, or the Rapid Support Force, has some ties with Wagner Group, the paramilitary group, and also Khalifa Haftar of Libya. But in terms of the Sudan Armed Forces, until now there is no evidence that they received any support from outside. Of course, because it's like the regular armed services, so they have ties and they have some kind of mutual relation with other armed services, like in Egypt or even in Chad. They have agreements, mutual defense agreements between these 10 countries. So I would maybe expect that they could use that in terms of intelligence, but in terms of like weapons, aid, military aid, I don't think there is no evidence of that yet.
And Zidan, do you foresee a spillover effect of this crisis in the remaining part of Sahel region? Or do you believe this conflict will merely stay within Sudan?
Of course, of course. So it has its ties with the whole Sahi region, because so Hemeti, because it's a paramilitary and a militia group, he kind of tried to recruit many Arab tribes from Niger, Central African Republic, Chad, and all of these countries are in the same kind of tribal fabric. So he tried to recruit as much as he can, preparing for this war to happen. So if things if well, let's say the scenario of the army not being able to eliminate the RSF from Khartoum, or the RSF got some kind of support from regional countries, this could be an ethnic kind of regional conflict, and that's actually very troubling for all of the region that is actually neighboring Sudan. This goes from all over the Eritrea, Ethiopia, and to the west to Chad, Niger, and so forth.
Thank you very much, Yaser Zeidan, for being guest in our show.
Thank you very much, Syed.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was Yaser Zeidan, a person who not only understands the subject but has a lot of local knowledge and has seen the crisis first-handedly. Now, from another part of Africa, I am joined by Mr. Ahmad Zaki, who is these days in Somaliland and is one of our favorite experts of the African affairs. I welcome you, Ahmad Zaki, to my show.
Thank you for having me.
Ahmed Zaki, I was talking to Yaser Zeidan a while ago. I'm sure you must have heard what he has said. Let me ask you the same question. So, do you believe that this conflict is going to perpetually stay within Sudan, or can it have a spillover effect in other parts of the region?
I agree with Yaser Zeidan that the violence have started with unexpected events, and it spread across the country, especially Sahel region. And the reason that the violence is spreading is that the military is not that much capable to counter-attack with the RSF, because they are having much more practice and having much more wealthier than the national army.
And coming to Yaser Zeidan's point, where he said that the international actors are not so heavily engaged as propagated by the Western media. What's your take on it? Do you actually believe that the international actors have a major say or have a major role in this crisis?
To some extent, they have enough resources from home national resources, national army, they are in the position to have the oil wealth regions that the national government is controlling, and it's in the hands of the military administration. On the other side, RSF, they have the gold which Sudan used to produce. They are in control with that gold. They received a hell of money from Arab coalition against the Yemen war, against the Houthi war, which they were participating on. That the RSF, they received already a lot of money from Saudi Arabia and UAE, and still receiving on that money. On the other side, when you see the natural resources which they have currently, it's mainly on that gold, which I already earlier mentioned.
All right, let's zoom out a bit, Ahmad Zaki, and let's talk about the Sahel region at large. So, help us to understand what else is happening in other parts of Sahel region so that we can stitch this back to what is happening inside Sudan. We want to understand the larger geopolitical picture of Sudan in context of Sahel.
And number one, it's the Sahel region is the strategic position of Sudan in terms of economics and in terms of a population. Anyone who wins the Sahel region will control all the nation, either it's wealth or either it is political influence. So everyone is competing to have the larger portion of the Sahel region. That is why the main conflict is going on in Khartoum.
And is it a fact, Ahmad Zaki, that both sides have refused to negotiate, and that leaves military assault or military confrontation to be the last option to decide this conflict?
RSF, they cannot compromise because the mission which they took is a do or die mission, which means so long they were getting since their popular influence in the public affairs, they were getting direct support from the government. They were pro-government paramilitary organization, and now they are challenging the same government which was supporting them financially, giving them latest weapons, training them, and giving them a lot of facility to do all the dirty work that the government want to do in especially in Darfur region. Now, if they challenge their masteries, it's a do or die situation, that whether they will win or they will exist, or they will lose and they will never exist again. And that is the main reason that the war cannot be go through negotiation. On the other side, national army is feeling embarrassed because they didn't listen the demand of the public for restoring the democracy, giving the chance for the public. And they feel that because they were controlling the nation for a long time since since previous administration of Omar Hassan al-Bashir and to this Abdelaziz Burhan, both of them, they are following the same strategy and the same methods to control the public resources and do not allow the civilian administration to come to make a political decision.
Thank you very much, Ahmad Zaki, for helping us to understand this topic in depth. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break and we'll join you back with second segment of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Syria, after facing one of the worst civil wars in the world, has now started to restore not only the writ of its own state, not only it has defeated terrorism, not only it has defeated the various militant outfits that were fighting the state, but has also started to diplomatically restore its relationship. And all of this has happened despite the fact that the entire West, led by United States of America, has tried to isolate Syria as much as possible. Now, the recent news of inclusion of Syria back into the Arab League, a body that had suspended the membership of Syria since 2011, is one of the major developments. Many believe that it is a part of a different, what should I say, strategy that Saudi Arabia has adopted, or a shift in their policy that Saudi Arabia has adopted, or the new vision of 2030 that Mohammed bin Salman has brought to the kingdom, which has not only restored the relationship with Iran, as we covered a couple of shows ago, but have also given an opportunity, a lifeline have been thrown toward Syria as well, a country that has been most adversely hit by the war. And Ahmad Zaki continues to be my guest. He's an expert of this region. So, Ahmed Saki, a while ago we were talking about Sudan. Now, help us to understand the current situation in Syria, as you are an expert of the subject. Tell us what exactly is the state of affairs in Syria. Is it still a scenario where where different sides are fighting against each other, or do you see a better picture at the moment?
Still, they didn't overcome militarily, but definitely diplomatically they win against the militant against the government. Government is largely controlling in most of the area of Syria, other than the area that the Turkey now currently have the control on it. There are some area which like Idlib area, which have in the hands of the militants. The militants lost the diplomatic ground, which they were getting mostly the support of the Saudi Arabia and Western support, especially United States. And if you remember last time, President Trump removed his army from Syria while they were supporting the opposition freedom fighters against the Assad.
So, Ahmed Zaki, to my understanding, the militants have not been wiped off completely, or have they been taken off the scene entirely?
No, there are some areas still they are controlling, but they are not that much effective as they used to be, because now there is no direct foreign intervention of Syrian conflict, uh, especially in the side of Western side and in the side of Saudi Arabia. So mostly they lost the ground, but still they are existing. They can carry out any sort of operation in particular regions.
And how would be the other neighboring states of Middle Eastern region at large would be looking into the restoration of Syria into the mainstream diplomacy of Arabian Peninsula? Do you believe it is going to affect the larger picture that the Middle Eastern nations are facing at the moment?
It came after the uh, diplomatic connection between Riyadh and Tehran when they resolved their conflict through with the help of the Chinese government. Mostly the civil war which was going on especially in Middle East, they were either supported by Iran or either they supported on the other side by Saudi Arabia, and this is one of the diplomatic victory uh, for Chinese in the influence of the Middle East, and Syria is get that chance that Saudi Arabia now is willing to accept them, and they are telling the other Arab nations to accept it because Saudi Arabia have no conflict with Syria right now.
And Ahmed Zaki, taking advantage of your presence, I would want to understand the significance of Arab League. Is it that important of a body that the restoration of membership of Syria would catch headlines and on all international newspapers?
Generally, when you see the Arab world, uh, the Arab League have not a significant influence in any other country. But when they make decision, especially Saudi Arabia and Egypt, which was the two most influential Arab nations in the group, they are interested mostly to carry out their own agenda rather than the general agenda of the Arab League. So mostly, if the Saudi Arabia is uh, accepting that decision, is most of the Arab nations they will follow the suit. On the other side, Arab League mostly they are dealing with two main issues, which again and again comes back and shows a lot of failure. Number one, the issue is that the difference between the fight between Israel and the Arab nations, and the other one is that the Arabs who are fighting for the freedom of Palestine to be recognized as a state and to be recognized as some freedom fighters, and some of the Arabs who are fighting for Palestine are being considered as a terrorist organization. That is one of the main reasons that the Arab League is not making any progress, or it's not making any significant improvement.
Thank you very much, Ahmad Zaki, for being guest in our show today. Ladies and gentlemen, to talk further about this subject, I have invited one of my favorite experts about Middle East. You might have noticed that whenever we talk about the Middle Eastern region, I often try to get Dr. Rashid janjua to my show, who always enlighten us with his wonderful thoughts. Doctor, welcome to the show once again.
Thank you.
Doctor, help us to understand the significance of the inclusion of Syria in Arab League after a span of 12 years.
Arab League is a 22-member group of Arab countries, and its significance lies in its ability to resolve the disputes. Though there are detractors who say that it's been a very effete and, in fact, ineffectual grouping, but its symbolic importance is more because it's a grouping that signifies a new Arab, renaissance in political, economic, and diplomatic integration. So that therein lies its significance, because if you exclude a country like Syria was excluded 12 years ago, so which means that the country is outside the pale of union that symbolizes the unity of the Arab world.
Dr. Rashid, if I understand correctly, UAE and Qatar were initially quite reluctant in the inclusion of Syria. So, do you believe anything has happened in the backstage of the Arab League, or has there been some other developments that we are not aware of?
Yes, this has waned considerably because both the countries have not opposed inclusion of Syria into Arab League. Rather, UAE had established good relations as back as 2018. It was in fact Qatar and Kuwait which had more reservations. And the last holdout, as pointed out by two writers in a Washington Post article, was Qatar. But Qatar has also not opposed, which means that their reservations remain intact, but they have not opposed the inclusion into Arab League.
Dr. Rashid, does it actually reflect a change in approach or strategy by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which has shifted its foreign policy to an entirely different axis now?
Of course, Saudi Arabia was the main protagonist, and it was the main catalyzer. Why it happened and what was the interest of Saudi Arabia will be better understood if we consider the Vision 2030 of Saudi Arabia, wherein a new realignment of its policies is taking shape, and the new vision is premised upon greater regional connectivity, integration, no conflicts into the neighborhood, to ensure a complete economic renaissance and development of non-oil sector, opening up of economy, loosening of the strictures which had kept Saudi Arabia isolated hitherto. So all those things combined, and then the United States of America's deprioritization, as one of the research scholars, Randa Slim, points out. She's a member of Middle East Institute. She says that deprioritization of the region by United States of America gave Saudi Arabia more incentives, because they thought that now, especially after the Biden administration, and their support militarily for the Yemen conflict waned, and Saudi Arabia realized that this is a costly conflict. So it's better that the conflict is resolved. And this was the main catalyst that Saudi Arabia thinks that its new policy under the new leadership and the new vision that Saudi Arabia wishes to embrace, it makes the resolution of conflicts and peace in the region a prime requirement.
And how is it going to affect the region at large? Particularly, I would want to understand how would Turkey be looking into these developments, a country that has quite a lot of interest in the Syrian conflict.
You see, Turkey is also being roped in, and Russia is playing a very important part. And there is a move which is going to take place in Russia, featuring the foreign ministers of Syria and Turkey to patch up their differences and allow Turkey to develop good relations, because Turkey also, as you understand, because of its presence in north and northeast of Syria, is a stakeholder, and it is being actively encouraged by Saudi Arabia, because the deal, the economic deal of $5 billion between Saudi Arabia and Turkey has to be seen in that context, in which probably in a greater Middle East, peace is incentive that is being offered by Saudi Arabia to these countries to achieve its own greater objectives of peace, connectivity, and regional development. So Turkey is a serious contender, and Russia is encouraging. Russia is going to play the same role as China played into the patch-up of Saudi Arabia and Iran. So that would give Russia also a measure of respectability into international affairs that it is seeking, especially after the isolation in Ukraine war. And those are very interesting cross currents, because Russia was also a stakeholder. Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah, they were the main stakeholders that propped up the Bashar al-Assad regime. And now these are the same forces whose interests have now aligned. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, and Turkey, all the interests are coalescing to create a kind of a peaceful environment in which the concrete manifestation is reintegration of Syria into the Arab League.
Dr. Rashid believes janjua Israel was also one of the major stakeholders. Not only it facilitated the creation of ISIS, funded ISIL, but also took part in the military conflict directly. We are aware of many raids made by Israelis. How happy or sad would Israel be with this development? And also tell me if this is the only reason why United States is not comfortable with this development.
Not only Israel, but United States of America, they also have expressed their reservations. And Israel, of course, because Israel basically is wary of ISIL and other extremist organizations. And the recent bombings of Syrian border is also indicative of those concerns. And then there's a Lebanese angle. In Lebanon, there are, I think, 0.8 million refugees, Syrian, which is also a factor that Israel is looking very carefully when, especially in the context of its standoff with Hezbollah. So Israel has serious security concerns and reservations, but I think those reservations would attenuate if the overall situation gets stabilized and there are countries that have stake in the peace, and if the violence subsides, that in the long term would benefit Israel as well.
Iran and Russia have their own role in the Syrian war. One has provided military on ground, the other has provided air support and a lot of ammunition to the fighting side. But we can see that Iran's economic crisis and Russia's military engagement in Ukraine must have had a diversion from the Syrian crisis. Is that an advantage for the Syrian government at the moment?
Russian interests have not faded. In fact, as earlier pointed out, Russia is playing a very important role in patching up differences between Syria and Turkey. Iranian interests have not waned. They are still interested in keeping some kind of presence, because they invested very heavily in propping up Bashar al-Assad. Syria is a 50% Sunni, 15% Alawite Shia, and 10% Levant. So it's a veritable mix of complex ethnicities. So each country has a stake, and Iran would not let go of an opportunity to have some kind of influence and affinity with the Bashar al-Assad government. Saudi Arabia and Iran's recent uh, reconciliation is a positive development for the region, and but it should also be seen in the context of a desire for Saudi Arabia to reduce the influence of Iran by way of engaging Syria back into the Arab fold. So some political commentators and political scientists also view the development this way, that it is in fact Saudi Arabia is increasing its influence by way of integrating uh, Syria back into the Arab League, and in that way, the Iranian influence would be slightly reduced.
And lastly, would Iran use this as an opportunity to circumvent the sanctions that it has been facing? I mean, the inclusion of Syria, would that help Iran to circumvent the sanctions that it is facing?
Uh, no, I don't think so. That is the only incentive, because there are not only the primary sanctions. The UN has not. UN has lifted the sanctions after Iran opted for negotiations on JCPOA. Uh, there are secondary uh, sanctions which are imposed by United States, and those secondary sanctions, as you understand, impose restrictions on entities which are not directly linked with the United States and Iran, which prevent countries like even Pakistan to do trade with Iran. So those secondary sanctions of European Union and United States, those are intact, and those would keep impacting Iran. But the more important thing is that this would break the Iranian isolation in the Middle Eastern region, and its costly standoff with Saudi Arabia over the Yemen conflict and other issues, and a continual standoff, draining of resources, and antipathy vis-a-vis all the Arab countries in the region, that would give them a kind of a reprieve. So I think I look at it that way. And there are countries like China and Russia; they are playing very important role in not only economic diplomacy, but also now they are going for geopolitical initiatives to play their dominant role in Saudi Arabia, as United States has shown its interest away from Middle East.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rashid Wali Janjua, for being guest in our program.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break and we'll join you back with last segment of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back to the last segment of the program. Ladies and gentlemen, United States of America enjoys a lot of influence, a lot of hegemonic powers in the world. And we divide these into two tiers. One is the military presence, the hard power that United States enjoys with a lot of presence to military bases or naval bases in different corners of the world. And the other one is its soft power. Primarily, the soft power is driven out of its influence on the global economic system. And if we define it further, if we zoom in further, we come to understand that it is the United States economy and the supremacy of its dollar that makes all other countries in the world look towards United States as the strongest economy. One of the reasons why many countries have their international reserves in the United States currency. Primarily a reason why international trade is taking place in the currency of United States of America. But United States is not only facing severe diplomatic crisis with its confrontation with China, where situation is not very good, but also the fact that US's economy is also under a lot of pressure. The recent headlines in the international media were from the US debt crisis. United States is crumbling under its own debt. And if the situation continues as estimated by Modi's, this is going to give a kickstart to a chain of economic problems within the United States. To talk further about it, I have invited Sultan Ali Haider, who is an expert of political economy and will help us to understand economic as well as political directions of dimensions of this saga. Sultan Ali Haider, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you, Shabahat. Always a pleasure to join your program.
Sultan, what is this debt or default about? I mean, United States does not owe money to anyone else. We are talking about United States falling in debt of the United States. Help us to understand this.
Okay, first of all, default is very simple. Default is when you are unable to make the payments that you committed to. So if you have taken debt, you're obliged to pay it on the date. So in case you are unable to do that, so that's called a default. Now, in terms of US government is bound by a debt ceiling. That debt ceiling is set by the Congress. So what keeps on happening is that US debt level is already very high. It's near that limit. So when the government keeps on spending, it reaches that level, and then the Congress has to agree to raise the ceiling so that it can take on further debt.
And what exactly has triggered this problem at this stage?
So over the last 60 years, US government has raised the ceiling 75 times, and it's a negotiation between the president's office and the Congress. This time around, US president has said that he will not negotiate. Joe Biden has said that he will not be negotiating with Congress on its conditions or terms to raise the debt ceiling. Congress is naturally demanding, is controlled by Republicans, that you cut some of your spending. US president is saying that's a separate debate, we'll take it separately. Now that is sort of has become a game of chicken. So that is creating that crisis. And the crisis is already underway. Effectively, 19th of Jan, already the limit was hit. US Treasury, it has certain tools which are called extraordinary measures, you can say accounting tools, through which it is trying to manage, is still making payments, but it will run out of those options estimated by 1st of June, which is called the X date. So that is what's creating this crisis. So US government will default. It will no longer be able to make those payments because of the hard ceiling or taking on more debt set by the Congress.
But I fail to understand why would they just not print their own money? It's US dollar. It doesn't have backing of other currencies. It doesn't have backing of gold. Why can't they just print it instead of borrowing from their own central bank? So please help us to comprehend this.
Okay, so it's not a question of that. It's a question of the reason why a country's economy inspires confidence, and that is why its currency has confidence, is if the country's economy is run in a fiscally responsible way. So there are two things. In every country, we experience that there's an annual budget, and that budget is approved by its parliament or the Congress, that body. Similarly, even in Pakistan also, the debt ceiling is also determined. So while the government's budget is approved, the total debt the government can take on that, there's also a limit which is set on that. So there's this check in, and US also is the constitution which introduced this system of checks and balances. So there's this check, hard check, which incidentally also inspires confidence in the US financial system. So that check is controlled by Congress. It is not governed by the executive in the American political system.
And Sultan, why is it such a significant problem? What can be the worst case scenario?
Okay, so the significance of hitting this is, once this is hit, as per US law, Treasury will not be able to issue more Treasury bills and raise debt from the market, right? Once it issues those T-bills, even China holds a lot of US Treasury bills, other international players own it, local individuals also own it. So it will not be able to issue that debt as per law. So that is the real thing. Now, in terms of the impact, the total debt is $31.5 trillion. So if the US government defaults on that, that's for the not only for US but global financial system. It's a thermonuclear event, because not only is a large quantity, everything, global economy is benchmarked against US dollar, and the US dollar interest rates. So everything goes off the rails, interest rates will shoot up, nobody will know what to do. Reserve currency status of US dollar also gets challenged, and we have talked about that before also.
That would have certainly been my next point, Sultan, my next question instead. So, what can be the global implications for it? Because certainly, United States economy has effect on the economy of the world as well. Uh, and would it be going to affect its global hegemony? Is it going to give birth to economic crisis in the rest of the world?
You see, anyone who comments on this will not be able to say anything with certainty because it's not an event which has occurred ever in the past. And that again makes it so significant. But going by the most credible authority would be the White House itself. And White House issued a statement in which I was reading that if this event occurs, then the confidence of the world in US dollar and US treasury will go down significantly, and people will not be investing in US treasury. And subsequent impact of that is when people are not willing or people are not queuing up to buy US treasury bills, then the interest rates go up. Nobody is buying US debt. So US will be forced to pay more interest and increase further interest so that people become interested in that. So it will have an impact on US currency exchange rates. So and it will increase the interest payments. So fiscal deficit will increase, trade deficit will increase, all kind of catastrophe for US economy. And then on the flip side is no, I haven't read anyone talk about it, but we have discussed that before, that the issue of US no longer being reserve currency of the world has so many different implications. And that's a totally uncharted territory.
And Sultan, one part of my question that remained unattended was that is it going to give birth to global economic crisis?
Yes, of course, because even in this, there's a lot of debate that while there's a lot of fatigue in the system and the economy has just come out of the COVID-19 impact, and whether this crisis, because this crisis can be avoided, right? It's a political created crisis. It's not an event-driven crisis as such. Now, it will impact for sure. We have seen that when the interest went up, Silicon Valley Bank, and again, that impacted everything globally. Now, if the interest rate go up further, it's not going to impact US only, it's going to impact global financial system. And the parallel that people are drawing is one parallel is the 2008 financial system crisis. So that impacted globally, but this would be a bigger event than that because in that it was Lehman Brothers and the credit market getting jammed. If this is United States itself, this is United States government, so it's going to have a far more reaching impact. Lastly, I would say that while we're talking about this extreme scenario and extreme implications, I would have expected, I've just checked, in the last couple of weeks, I have not seen gold prices go up significantly vis-a-vis US dollar. That's one indication of flight to alternative assets. Another alternative assets digital is Bitcoin. I haven't seen the Bitcoin prices going up. They have rather come down slightly. So naturally, markets are not factoring that in. They do not expect that. But I do feel that such an event for sure will really reduce the status of USD as reserve currency of the world.
Thank you very much, Sultan Ali Haider, for being guest in our program today.
Thank you, Shabahat. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the economic problems of United States of America continues, and this is no surprise for the rest of the world, where inflation and devaluation has hit records, has broken all the records in the past. We are going through very difficult economic times, and Paul Tynes will keep you updated on all the major development happening on the economic fronts. We'll join you next week with another program, and until then, Allah Hafiz.